And welcome back, footy fans, to another episode of Donnie's Disposals. I'm your host, Coach Donnie Hess, here, back with a special kind of special show that I wanted to do to round out the year with 2024 breaking down onto us very, very quickly. I wanted to kind of break down the year just really, really quickly by myself. As you can see, I have no co-host with me today because I wanted to kind of do this myself. So again, thank you for hopping onto this podcast. And again, 2023 has been a year quite interesting for me. It's been a very difficult year personally, but the one thing that I have thoroughly enjoyed about this year has been this podcast and the audience and the people that I have had the pleasure of working with this year. So, first off, again, this has been a magnificent year for me personally and for the podcast, just because I think the podcast has grown leaps and bounds as we saw this year. I started covering the Waffle, the Sandful, and the VFL, and I had an absolute blast doing all three. It made my summer over here very, very hectic, especially with my coaching and everything like that. But I thoroughly and enjoyed it. So I thought really quickly we'll break it down for those for what I would consider a heck of a year. And I want to go back and just give a nice shout out and highlight to all of the premiers that were able to raise cups this year. We'll start at the VFL with the Gold Coast Suns with their VFL team that was absolutely outstanding this year. So a claps to them, and the VFLW Winterport Melbourne Burrows were the two teams that won premierships in the VFL. We shift over to the Sandful, where we saw the Central District Bulldogs take home the Sandful W premiership, and the Glenelg Tigers take home the men's league championship. And out in the Waffle, both premierships went to the East Fremantle Sharks. So an incredible state leagues. And on the men's competition in the AFL, the Collingwood Magpies and the Magpie Army continue to have another magnificent season, getting another premiership and the Hallow Halls of Victoria Park. And just recently, we saw the Brisbane Lions step back to the top of the rock that is their premiership, their second premiership ever as the Brisbane Lions. But so it's been a fun year when it comes to premierships and some different teams and different things like that. But the biggest thing that I wanted to do with this podcast is to thank all of the people that I've had the pleasure of working with. So I'm just going to go over a few names here and throw in just a few things that I must say I wanted to do with. So for some of my US based friends that I had the pleasure of working with, Rick Shaibani out in California. Rick, thank you so much again. You hopped on three times for me and it really was a backup. So I truly appreciate everything that you did. Gil Griffin, Gil, you're an amazing, amazing person. I love working with you, and it's always great to chat footy with you. Always fun. Brian Barris, the media manager at the USAFL. Brian, fantastic, knowledgeable human being. Love chatting with him. The Americans watching the footy boys, both Ben and Ethan Castle. Gentlemen, I loved working with you guys. It was so much fun being able to sit down and talk with you guys. I'm hoping we can catch up maybe on your podcast very, very soon. But again, wanted to throw the shout out. And then we'll go up north to Canada and Mick Ozzie. Mick has been fantastic working with you, sir. It was a great to have you on the podcast, both as an interviewer and as a co-host hopping on for that. Now we got to go down to my Australian friends, and this is a long list. So stay with me. Bevy of Bloods, Chris, who helped hop on a couple of times this year, both for the AFL and for the AFLW. The True Bloods Deebs from the True Bloods podcast. It was great being able to sit down and finally talk with him. I enjoy their work at the True Bloods podcast as a Swan supporter, but it was so much fun to be able to work with him on that one. Alex Doherty of the Mongrel Punt. I go back with him, forth with him all the time. We talk AFL and AFLW and his A3 podcast that he just recently got. He just recently I was able to find. It was so much fun to listen to. The Attention to Detail podcast, the Melbourne Demons podcast. Simo and Tim, again, gentlemen, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast this year. It was great talking with you two gentlemen on that. From the Chaps Chat Cats podcast, Jake actually hopped on this podcast. It was so much fun to finally sit down and chat with him. Another podcast that I have to give a huge shout out to, and that is the Crowjack podcast, because I've really went back and forth with most of the members, whether it's Ben, Jade, Ray, Peter, all of the people, Sophie, all the people that I go back and forth with on that. Again, the Crowjack podcast. If you catch my socials, I had the pleasure of getting a few Go Crom products in the mail, and I definitely will be wearing them up here during the cold Iowa winter for sure. So huge thank you to the Crowjack podcast. Jamie Oliver and Dave Werner, a couple of huge Port Adelaide supporters that have both hopped on the podcast for me. I love chatting with them. Riles Mack of the Riles Mack YouTube channel, it was great to sit down and have a nice chat with him during the year. The Pommy and Oz, I absolutely love Pommy. He's fantastic. He's part of the Carlton Blues Network. It's so much fun to chat with him, especially considering an American and an Englishman is so much fun when it comes to talking with that. The Talking Hawks and Soaring to New Heights podcast members of Tim and Liam, chatting with both of them this year, whether it was AFL or AFLW. Gentlemen, I loved working with you two. From the Blue Abroad, Terry Degani, the starter of Blue Abroad. I absolutely love working with you, Terry. Fantastic. Some really fantastic females I got to work with. Marnie Cohen, Ali Collette, Nikki Claire, and Emma Phillips. I love all of you ladies. You're fantastic. I love working with you, whether it's AFL or AFLW. It's so much fun to chat with you. Now, I've had the pleasure this year of chatting with several players, both in the state league and with the AFL and AFLW. I want to thank a few of them that I had the pleasure of having on. Sarah Madden of the East Perth out in the Waffle, Georgia Madigan of the Central Districts Bulldogs, Tarni Golisano of the Subiaco Lions, Brandon Ursig of the Swan Districts Footy Club, Najwa Allen of Adelaide and of Norwood, Annie Falkenberg of Woodville West Torrens, Steph Simmons and Ali Farrell, both of Norwood, Brianna Tarrant of the Sydney Swans, and then both coaches at Woodville West Torrens, Coach Narelle Smith and Coach Big Sauce Sam Jacobs, the umpire of the AFLW and Waffle, Gabby Simmons, and then special shout outs to Bevan Jones, a podcaster out of South Australia, who I had a blast talking to, and Mike Curran out of Ireland, who was absolutely magnificent to talk with. But I got to say the best for last, ladies and gentlemen. This podcast would not be what it is without producer Ross. And again, we didn't have Ross on very much this year. Only one podcast was he able to hop on. But again, it's been a pleasure working with him. He's given me this opportunity and this platform, and I cannot thank him enough. Again, Ross, when you hear this, thank you, sir. This has been a true blessing. I cannot believe I get the pleasure of doing this and be able to meet people from halfway across the world and be able to talk about a sport that I have absolutely fallen in love with. So I know this has been a lot of me talking, and I know I don't want to waste too much time here. So again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for a 2023 of interesting and a lot of fun to be able to sit on this podcast and be able to talk with people in Australia and all over the world. So this has been magnificent. So I'm going to sign off for the last time in 2023, but that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. 2024, I've got some big things. I've got more of my supporter series still to come. And then, as per usual, once the footy season hits, AFL, Sample W, Waffle W, VFL, and VFLW coverage still to come next year. And I'm going to try to get some more player interviews over this long off season to be able to get us to March. So, again, thank you so much. This has been another episode of Donnie's Disposals. Again, keep an eye out. More footy coverage to come very, very soon. Thank you and good evening.